It's time for Let's Talk with Tara. Tara is a counseling coach who addresses real issues that plague many women today. Issues like church hurt, disappointment, anxiety, depression, and many more. You will be inspired, educated, and empowered on how to receive the help and healing needed to move forward. If you have real issues, then Tara has real solutions. Let's talk with Tara.
Hello. Great day, everyone. This is Dr. Tara T Stallings, and you are listening to the Let's Talk with Tara podcast. I am your counselor, life coach, and spiritual consultant. Join me live every fourth Saturday here on Let's Talk Tara for our Let's Talk Tara podcast. Today we are talking about SA, sexual abuse. Taking sides regarding sexual abuse in the family edition. What is sexual abuse? Sexual abuse is defined as a sexual behavior or act forced upon a woman, man, or child without their consent. Sexual abuse includes abuse of a woman, man, or a child by a man, woman, or child. The different forms of sexual abuse or sexual assault includes penetration of the victim's body, also known as rape, attempted rape, forcing a victim to perform sexual acts such as oral sex or penetration of the perpetrator's body, fondling, unwanted touching. So today we're going to talk about briefly, because we're going to talk about this for a couple of segments because there's so much information. When we talk about when sexual abuse occurs, family members may take sides with those who abuse instead of them that are being abused. They will take sides with the abuser, instead of the survivor. Why does this happen? Especially a lot of times in the African American culture, the black brown community. Why does this happen? Perhaps the most common reason boils down to this. People don't want it to be true. They don't want it to be true. We all know someone who has been sexually assaulted or abused, but very few of us will admit that we know a person who sexually abuses. Think about that. People who sexually abuse are not just shadowy figures in dark alleys. They are hidden in our family, in our neighborhoods, their colleagues, and sometimes they are friends. It can be unfathomable. Try to say that 3 times. To many of us, that our loved one could commit such a hideous act. However, many people do. In fact, and these are statistics, in all child abuse cases, 34% are committed by a family member. 34% are committed by a family member. Now, these are reported cases. These are only reported cases. Sometimes the person who abuses may come across as a model citizen, successful executive, or doting parent, which only adds to the confusion. Listen, there are some reasons why this happens and there is disbelief in the family and they take sides. One reason is the reputation of the family is at stake. It's maybe a family that's prominent in the community and the reputation becomes at stake. Talking about abuse a lot of times is considered a taboo. It's just not talked about. Think about it. A lot of times sex is not talked about in the family. A person who hurts you the abuser could be the head of the household. How would that look? If that truth could threaten resources or finances, or it could break the family unit up. Another reason, other survivors that have been victims of abuse, they may not be ready to speak up. So if they're not ready to speak up and face their trauma, a lot of times they don't want you to face your trauma. They don't want your reality to become their reality, or they have to face that reality. Let me put it that way. They have to face that reality. And then other times it's the religious expectations around abstinence. Sometimes this is what happens in families. So, a lot of times when family members take sides with the person who abuses instead of the survivor, family members may not be able to give the support that's deserved because they just deny that the abuse happened. Sometimes they deny that the abuse happened. And they want you to remember details from the trauma exactly. Or you giving incorrect details of the trauma because you're traumatized. And they don't understand how trauma affects the brain and how trauma affects the person psychologically. They minimize the abuse. They downplay it like maybe it was a mistake or the person had been drinking. It was just a moment or it was a misunderstanding. They downplay it. They minimize the abuse. Other reasons is they place the blame on you. They place the blame on the victim instead of the predator. They may say you're trying to get attention or you're lying, things like that. I have heard these stories so many times. Many imply that someone consented or they deserved it to happen to them. Especially with young girls. Young girls, I hear this all the time, whether it's uncles, that's the predator, or it's boyfriends, or sometimes even the fathers. The mothers will say, well, the young girl was implying they were fast, they wanted it, they were dressing a certain way around the house or around this person, and they blame the victim instead of the predator. And they take sides. They get defensive. They get angry. And they ostracize the victim. They get angry and they ostracize the victim. And this should not be. But this happens all the time. Family members will take sides with the abuser instead of the survivor, with the victimizer instead of the victim. They take sides with the victimizer instead of the victim. A lot of times when we talked about, hey, they get defensive or they make excuses, they minimize the abuse. I have heard things like, well, boys will be boys, especially if it's a cousin or a brother or a nephew that's the victimizer. They will say things like that. They were just being boys. No. A lot of times, especially when they're children, and I want to say this, if it's a cousin or a nephew or a neighborhood friend that's maybe a few years older than them, a lot of times the predator, the victimizer, was once the victim. They were once the victim. I've heard things like, especially if it's a boy victim and a female victimizer, they'll say, oh, she's just teaching that boy how to satisfy a man. This is crazy, you guys. But this is the mindset of people. He or she, they're a good person. You know, they're a leader in the church. They have a family. They wouldn't do such a thing. They're a good person. Well, guess what? Good people make bad decisions and they do bad things. Good people do. They say things like, you know, it's not just a big deal. It happened, you know, get over it. Let's not talk about it again. You know, we talked about they put the blame on people. They put the blame on you. You know, don't say that about that person. Just forget about it. You didn't probably realize what happened, or you had a dream, you misunderstood, or if it happened a long time ago and the person is now able to share what happened to them, they'll say, excuse me, are you sure that happened? It happened such a long time ago. Are you sure you're not getting it mixed up with something? We have to be careful, because family will take sides with the victimizer, the abuser, instead of the victim. And we need to, as a society, stop this, because that becomes like a re-victimization to the victim. When they get the courage up to share their truth, their trauma, and you deny it, you minimize it, it's, you know, denied, or it's looked upon as they did something wrong, or they deserved it, or it's just kind of what we say, swept up under the rug. This becomes like a re-victimization for the victim. It becomes a re-victimization for the victim. And it causes so many mental issues with the person. And we're going to talk about that later in our next segment. But I want to just give you an idea. This happens. I want to give you some information on what happens in families where there is a sexual abuse, and they take sides. Why this happens? Because a lot of times, sometimes the victims just don't understand, why is this happening to me? I told my truth. I'm being honest. I'm looking for help, and they're taking sides. They don't believe me. They made me feel like I did something wrong. So we have to be mindful of that. Listen, if you are, or someone you know has been victimized with SA or sexual abuse, please reach out to the hotline at 1-800-656-4673, or reach out to me at 706-414-5537, and I can help you heal from this victim, to go from a victim to a victory. Listen, you have been listening to the Let's Talk with Tara podcast, where we provide education, empowering, and information for you. Make sure you check my website out at Tara T Stallings Inc. for all my upcoming events, and follow me on social media at Let's Talk Tara.
You have been listening to Let's Talk with Tara. We hope you've enjoyed this show. Remember, if you have real issues, then Tara has real solutions. Thanks for stopping by. See you next week.